in a couple relationship, I show more self-awareness and emotional discipline kind of thing than my partner. Yet I certainly long for empathy and the feeling of a stable partnership. What is your experience in this? And do you have any advice? At the most general level, I would say we want to choose partners that are a close enough match, right? In our values and in our sort of level of development and skillfulness. If you're picking a partner, if this isn't for you, but this is not really just in general, like if you have a lot of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and you choose to be with somebody who has very little of that, that gap can be very, very big. And that's not going to feel satisfying to you ultimately, because even if both of you are growing, you're both growing like this, and the gap isn't really ever closing. Okay, so what you kind of are looking for as a baseline, one of the recommendations I often make is find somebody who's kind of in the same country as you in the kinds of skills and ways of being that you're wanting to be. So there's got to be enough shared values of, in my world, I would say you need to share a value of personal growth if you're a personal growth person. If you're a personal growth person and you want to be working on yourself and talking about feelings and needs and working on your skillfulness in a relationship, and you're trying to partner with somebody who is really on the path of love me as I am, I don't want to go into all of that deep stuff. Why keep looking under the rug? I want to be comfortable. And I'm tired of hearing from you that I'm not good enough the way that I am. That's not a good match. Like you have different values and what you're looking for in a relationship. So just keep that piece in mind. Now, let's say you have a relationship with somebody and you both are, like you're describing in your situation, you are both wanting to grow and develop. And you're kind of in the same country. Like, you know, there are some times where you're more skillful and maybe there are other times where they're more skillful. Or you go through a stage where your trauma is getting triggered, or they're going through a stage where their trauma is getting triggered. So then we want to start thinking a little bit about the long term of the relationship. What's the big picture? Are we close enough and we're going through a rough patch? Is this a short term, like we're going through a period right now where your things are up more than mine, but in general, we switch backwards and forwards pretty equally. Like over the long term, it feels balanced, but in the short term, it's feeling unbalanced. That's one problem. There's one way that I would work with that. But if over the long term, I'm in a relationship where my partner is always the one who's triggered and having problems, and I'm always bringing the resourcefulness, it's going to start feeling imbalanced. And when it starts feeling imbalanced, there's a lot of things we can do. One, we can name the imbalance. I'm noticing this, and here's what I'm needing. And then we can also do a lot of self-connection around what is it that I'm willing to be resourced about in the relationship, and what do I want to outsource, if I can, to a therapist, to a healing community, to a 12-step group, to an empathy group, to, you know, like as partners, we can't be, I mean, I suppose everybody can decide for themselves in your relationships what you want to be. But for myself, I don't want to be someone's therapist. I want to be their partner. I'm not looking for a project, right? And I'm not looking for a patient. I'm looking for a peer. And so having some clarity of intention in terms of what I'm looking for, and then in that frame of, I really want a partner and a peer, I have a lot of room for, sometimes you're going to be triggered and you're not going to be at your best. And then how would you like me to show up in a way that feels supportive and helpful to you? And when you're, you know, like we're not traumatized 24 hours a day. We're not in a crisis activated state 24 hours a day. So in a period where things are okay, am I asking then for more of what I'm needing too? Or have I let a part of myself go offline and I'm not even asking for it anymore? And I'm just feeling resentful about the imbalance? Because one of the things we can learn to do is ask for more of the kind of emotional support that we may be wanting. It is not our partner's job to provide a healing environment for our trauma. It is not their job. It is a huge gift. if they can give that, but it's not something to expect. So when we have something coming up, if I'm in a relationship and I'm getting super reactive, I want to own that reactivity, and I want to do my own work around what is it that is getting me so hijacked. What are the memories? What are the unmet needs? What are the things that are mapping onto this? And I want to go do that work with someone who's not my partner. And I can include my part. I can tell them about it. I can share with them. I can, have a relational conversation, but I don't necessarily need them to be my healer. And so that's a little bit of how I work with it. Do I want empathy? Do I want connection? Do I want us to be able to relate about it? Yes, but I still want to own what's mine. And if my partner is often getting activated and I find myself often tending to them and I'm feeling an imbalance, I want to bring that up in the relationship and talk about that imbalance and find out together whether they're feeling the imbalance too and what we can do about that. Because that won't be sustainable in the long run for me. You get to decide in all your relationships what your, prime directive is. But that would be some of the principles that I use. How is that landing on you? What fits or doesn't fit, and what comes up next for you? Yes, but I want to just make a piece really clear. In my bringing my best resourced self, that's an instruction for me. That's not an instruction that I'm going to impose on my partner. And part of that for me is, am I wanting to provide empathy right now? Do I feel a longing in my heart to really be present in this moment and to field the feelings and field the needs and ask for requests? And does it bring me joy and energy to contribute in this way to my partner when they're in the stressed out state? Do I have the capacity and desire to do it? And if I have both the capacity and the desire, then go right ahead. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful gift. That's a lovely thing to do. But if what I'm finding in myself is a heaviness and a resistance and a little bit of like, oh my goodness, here we go again. And I'm the one who's doing all the listening and they can just say whatever they want. And I'm not appreciating that I'm not getting back what I'm offering. And that imbalance is beginning to bother me. Then that's the next thing for me to talk about. It does that work when you do that? Okay. So I think it's a really beautiful thing to offer. And I'd say keep doing that, inviting them. And when it works, wonderful. When it doesn't work, it's because the other person is hijacked by pain, and that pain will need to be named before they can get back to choicefulness. In a moment that is not the triggered moment, I would tell them exactly this thing that you're saying. I would say, here's what's challenging for me in those moments. And I would describe for them, not in the moment, but later when they're in a different place. I would bring in your own experience and I would talk about, I get really stuck. I feel like what I'm able to do is point to the hijacked state. Here's what my intentions are. This is what I'm trying to do. But I feel like I reach a limit in me of what I'm actually able to offer you in those moments. And I have a resistance that comes up. And how can we work with that differently? Like, I think I would hold that with the other person. What's likely happening for the other person, and I don't know them, so I'm just speaking in general here. But when you say something about you're hijacked by your pain and come back to me, what's happening is it's a younger self state of the partner who did not get their needs met in a situation that probably has little to do with you, even though you've stimulated it. And the anguish of that memory and that previous, that history of whatever it is that is getting re-experienced is showing up in the moment. To the degree that we can see that for what it is and welcome in the little girl, the little boy, the little child, and give them what they never got, which was kind eyes, empathy, embrace, love, understanding. Words like your anger is welcome here, your fear is welcome here, your outrage is welcome here, tell me more. To the degree we have the capacity to do that, we will support the healing and we will be meeting the person who they're giving us in that moment. That's very high level relational work. Most of us need a lot of training and intentionality to get there. If you want to bring that, there's lots of ways we can bring that. But I don't think that generally speaking in conventional relationships, that's what people are signing up for. And those are the moments where you can say, I can see you're in a lot of pain. Like when you say, I can see you're hijacked by pain, I'm imagining that the person receiving that might feel a little invalidated, like, oh, you only like the nice parts of me, but you don't like the scrappy parts of me. And you don't accept all of me. I have to be some curated version of like enlightenment and emotional health before you can love me. And there are younger parts that are scrappy and a little more messy who are testing out, are they welcome too? Tell me, what do you experience as giving in to the violence of the little girl? So I'm very familiar. Yes, I understand what you're saying. You don't want to be forced. You don't want to feel like you are just submitting to behaviors that you don't actually see as healthy in some ways, right? Like you don't want to enable things and validate and legitimize things that you'd like to see less of in the relationship. And so you're not wanting to submit to that. You're wanting to hold a higher standard of how we behave with one another. Am I getting that right or not? So I get that. Um, Here's the dilemma though. Um, when we are desperate, the reason people get violent is because they don't see any other way to get their need met. They've got a deeply unmet need. They feel urgency and desperation around it. And they in that state can't find any other way than insisting that the world be different and treat them differently. And finally, and they come with a lot of force and a lot of intensity. And that strategy, as you're pointing out, makes it exceedingly difficult for them to get the thing that they're needing. It's completely self-sabotaging. When we get violent and critical and judgmental and forceful and demanding and all of those things that we were trained to do and that our survival system is good at, like it's a fight response, that stimulates in the other person their own self-protective response. So what's happening for you is your own self-protective response kicks in and says, I don't want to be forced. If I'm going to offer you something, it needs to be on my terms and from an open heart, not because you're demanding it, insisting on it, ordering it up, because you want to experience yourself as a sovereign being as well. So this dynamic makes sense. Is that making sense to people so far? Okay. But here's the dilemma. The way out of that is for someone, and I'm not saying it has to be the partners in a partnership, it might be, but someone in the system needs to know how to feel the violence in a way that actually meets the need. Because if you want the quote unquote bad behavior to go away, the quickest way to get rid of violence is to meet the need. And domination programming, right-wrong programming, power programming will say, like, think about how many of us were parented. You don't get the reward until your behavior is better. And the pathway to getting your needs met is becoming first who I need you to be, and then I'll meet your needs as a reward. Now, I don't hear you saying that. I'm not hearing that in any of the things you're saying at all. I'm just speaking a bit more generally right now. This is not what I'm hearing from you. But we want to start examining because, yes, of course, I want to stay in choicefulness, but I can stay in choicefulness even when you're making demands of me. if I'm really, that then becomes again a practice for me to get grounded in my own truth and to get grounded in what I'm willing to offer and what I'm not, and being in charge of my own boundaries. But the part of me that worries that if in loving you up when you're being violent, that if you are bullying me and reactive and you're hijacked by your pain and you're accusing me and I love you up, if a piece of me is afraid that my being loving and empathic in that moment is going to give you the false idea that I approve of the violence or that I want more violence, that is not a fear that I think actually bears any water. Because what happens in my experience is that when somebody comes at me with, you know, you did this and you did that, and I can't believe blah, blah, blah. And when I'm able, I'm not always able, trust me, but when I'm able to say, okay, it sounds like what's important to you is this and this, and it looks like you're, and I understand that it's about their memory and about a small child that I'm working with, and I'm willing to work with the small child and be like, yeah, of course you feel angry. Of course, if you think that this is what's happening, of course that's what's going on. And if I'm willing to stay in relationship with them, like I would with a wounded dog, like I would with an animal that is wounded, that is biting me every time that I try to help it, when I realize that's not personal, and once this poor being feels better, they're going to stop biting me, then I can see through the illusion that in being relational around that I'm actually validating the behavior. And on the back end, once the emotion is discharged, once the connection is reestablished, once more trust is built, very often what I see happening is the other person says, oh my God, I'm so sorry I spoke to you that way. That wasn't me. Like, they know. I mean, there's two things I want to leave with you. If you're feeling resistance to staying available, I would honor that resistance. You get to have boundaries around what you do and don't want to engage in and with. If you want to stay connected and empathic when you're with a partner who is hijacked by something, if calling them back into, listen, I know this is a triggered state, if doing some conceptual road mapping and orienting and helping them get out of it is working, then do that. If it's not working, then the other move is lean into the pain, relax your own nervous system, and stay present. And generally people will get out of a hijacked state once they've been seen and heard and empathized with. Once those needs are met, that is the easiest and quickest way to get someone out of that state. You know, I can say you can empathize, but you're only going to enjoy the empathy to the degree that you trust yourself to not give the empathy when you don't want to. You have full permission to, you don't have to be that person for them. And then the discussions about what's happening, I would never do that discussion in the charged moment. Those discussions are in the, you know, the breakfast when you're feeling well over a cup of tea. Hey, can we take 15 minutes? And I want to just talk about a dynamic that I'm seeing. I want to see if you see it the same way. That's when you have those discussions. I love you very much. I can see you're in a lot of pain. I don't have the capacity to stay present to this any longer. I'm going to take a walk for a couple of hours and I'm going to be back. Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in there, like this sense that you're coming to of working with when it feels like a submission, and then setting a boundary and resourcing yourself so that it doesn't, when it feels like a gift, it's going to feel mutually beneficial. When it feels like a submission, it's not going to be good for either of you. So I think there's a lot to play with there in your own clarity as you navigate through situations, giving yourself permission to disconnect when you need to go after you. And trusting yourself that it doesn't mean that it's a rejection of the other person. It's a little bit more of an honoring of what they're needing and what you have to give and what you don't have to give. You don't have to be everything to all people all the time. And sometimes our inner systems give us cues that we've had enough and we now need a break. And it's important for us to honor those when they come up.